Hi, I'm David Singleton, founder and partner of L2 Fluency, along with Paul May. Welcome to April's edition of Greek Peek. Every month's Greek Peek can be seen on L2 Fluency's website. The focus of this month's study is Luke 12. Jesus wanted so badly for people to understand his Father and his world, his place. He described, compared, and commented on both his Father and his place a great number of times. He hated that people represented God and his place as removed so that people could not interact with him. It disturbed him that people spoke of God as someone who monitored people of this world and wanted their obedience and undying worship and compliance for sustaining them from afar. The idea, however, dominated the Jews' line of thinking for centuries, and one can see it best in their idea of God as holy. In fact, for a period in the Jews' history, scribes considered God so other than that when they copied the Bibles to be read in the local synagogues, they would not write the name of God in them. They would instead substitute Lord, Lord of hosts. God was considered so holy that mere humans couldn't stand in his presence. A little later, scribes would write the name for God and then immediately discard their writing styluses for new ones or cleanse themselves with a change of clothes or rinse off washing. Yes, dealing with the great I Am was not trifling for the Jews. He was holy. But Jesus didn't depict his Father like that. He wanted the Jews to see a different face for God. He was God's only Son and was in the beginning with the Father. He'd been around for all human existence. He knew his Father wanted a different relationship with those who represented him on the earth, thus, a different portrayal. Through their idea of holiness, the people he chose kept themselves on the level of performance, of always doing things the right way. If they did those things, they could count on God's goodness. If they didn't, he would cull them out of his circle. They saw their relationship with God as one built on obedience to the law, the strict letter of the law. But Jesus characterized God differently. He showed them that his Father would personally care and provide for each one of them. They could always trust him. So, what did Jesus see about the Jews that needed refinement of thought? He saw that there was little to no trust. The Jews' actions showed that they believed they had to take care of themselves. God might bless them if they did, he might not. Where was the trust? In Luke 12:16 through 21, Jesus put it like this to show the people how their actions looked to God. A rich man was successful in growing crops on his land. He asked himself what he ought to do with this huge crop that he had grown. He decided to build bigger barns to not only hold all of his crops, but all the possessions that would come as a result of selling such a huge crop. That's when Jesus felt he needed to make his point. God said to him, "How senseless! This night your soul." They are requiring of you. Who will your preparations belong to? The person who stores only for oneself is like this rich man. And not at all like God and his wishes for wealth. Let's start with the first comment Jesus made as a result of the rich man's conversation with himself. God said to him. He wanted the people to know something about his father. This story wasn't to show his own wisdom as a human. He was a member of God's family, and he wanted them to know who God was, a person to be trusted completely. So he starts with a comment from God because Jesus wanted everyone to know God was different from what most of them thought. Off-throne, God said to the man. God starts with a single word about the rich man's actions because they didn't carry much thought to them. Theologians behind the translations published for us today have changed the idea in Greek to God calling the man a fool. However, the word used is not a noun of address. It's an adjective. God is describing the rich man's decisions because they didn't make sense for someone who was supposed to be representing him. The rich man had decided to do something totally out of character for God, and that was to increase his wealth and keep it for himself. From God's point of view, that action had no rhyme or reason to it. Remember that Jesus was trying to redirect people's minds away from a remote God, plan A for most people, to someone familiar to them that they could trust, plan B for most people. Selfishness doesn't appear to be the point in the story. Trusting God to provide for our needs and not implementing our own plan for our needs seems to be the objective. The two plans have very different aims and goals. The story here is the prodigal son, where the younger son took matters into his own hands, lost everything, then returned to his father's place. The older brother had his feelings hurt on his younger brother's return, but the father told his older son there was no need to be hurt because he had never needed to leave. Everything the father had been his as well. It's the same observation Jesus made to the 12 after watching people in the temple court pass by the giving kiosk. The beggar lady gave all she had begged for that day to the temple because she knew God would supply her needs in the future. It's understanding the line Jesus gave to his 12 closest followers when teaching them to pray. Give us today's portion of the bread we need. And the purpose of the rich man's story of having his crops increased had the same goal as the time Jesus challenged another rich man to go and sell all he had in order to follow him. The stories reveal a God who says people don't have to trust themselves anymore. They can trust God to give them what they need again and again, every generation. Ephron is a good word to use for one's actions when trust is absent from people who think God is not involved much in deciding what they should do with what is given to them. Jewish leaders in particular had a way of accumulating wealth and then condescending to the rest of the population. Wealth blinds people that way. But using Ephron was just the attention getter before Jesus started with the meat of the matter. Jesus wanted badly to tell people about his Father's world, where the Father's nature of sharing everything he has with his children is the norm, not where people run off by themselves and build bigger and better barns only for themselves. So the rich man was on his own. The meat of the matter was that the decisions the rich man made were calling out to God to break off with someone who violated such a basic premise as not trusting God. Jesus acknowledged that this was the case. Tonight, they are requiring your soul. Not trusting God puts one in a different realm from God. You may have a version that says that the man's soul was being required. The word for required, apaitusin, is active, not passive. So the soul couldn't be being required. Apaitusin is plural also. So soul could not be the thing being required. In fact, soul is the direct object in the Greek sentence. Apaitusin's being active and plural means in English, they are requiring. The last two plural nouns for the pronoun they to refer back to are found in verse 19. Many good things stored up for many years. This phrase would then be the antecedent for they in verse 21. What does that little piece of grammar mean? That the decisions to build bigger and better barns and to store all those good things for the man's sole benefit represented an attitude so contrary to God's nature that all those good things stored for many years were asking for the man's soul. They are requiring or demanding was changed in the major translations to fit the sense of what theologians expected this verse to say. The actual grammatical subject makes more sense. God didn't call the man a fool and zap him because he was suddenly angered by the man's selfishness. God said the man's decisions were demanding that he look at the man's case because they ran contrary to a child of God knowing the Father's nature of taking care of his children and God's children's nature of trusting their futures would be provided for without fail. Jesus finished the story with a rhetorical question on the order of, you know this world isn't just about you, right? Well, his actual question was, so who will all these preparations belong to? Of course, they would return to God so he could share them again. He was planning for the rich man to do that in the first place. But this matter of a lack of trust raised its ugly head. Jesus never tired of wanting to redirect people's understanding from a God in the distance to a God they could trust to personally take care of them. Jesus stated this principle in the clearest of terms in Matthew 6, verses 25 through 34, using birds and wildflowers and King Solomon's finery. He even says people who didn't know God try to store their material possessions. But those who know God know that he provides his children with material things to live on, as recorded in verse 32. With the crowd in Matthew, Jesus reacted to the Jews' attitude of lack of trust with one word, little faiths, verse 30. In Greek, the reaction to the crowd is one word, even though most translations use a phrase or a sentence to express the word's meaning. I often want more than I need. I am very guilty of imagining bigger and better barns for myself. My level of satisfaction oversteps trusting God's nature and letting Him take care of what He already knows that I need. So, hearing again what Jesus wanted us to know about God is necessary for me. Verse 20 is a spiritual staple, since I am prone to storing in bigger barns. God said to him, "This night they are demanding your soul from you. Who do all these preparations belong to now?" Jesus had one more thing to say, his conclusion, the end of the matter. People who store things just for themselves are like this rich man, and not at all like God and his wishes for wealth. God is not holy, as in other than, remote, and impersonal. Jesus redirected us. God wants us to have Him in the primary place in our lives and show it through daily trust. When my story is told in heaven, I want Jesus' comment about me to be great faith.